Galway has an astronomical heritage, and this lay hidden for many years until the next speaker did some research and took this man back into the limelight out of obscurity. So without further ado, I call on Paul Mohr.
We seekers of the stars, I think, if you'll excuse me as a geologist joining you, because I have joined the astronomical community and been accepted into it with great honour in Galway, wonderful group of people. We seekers of the stars, waiting for the clouds to clear here in the west of Ireland patiently, and looking for the wonders of the heavens, we're of one and the same company with a young man up from Tuam, north of Galway, but 1.5 centuries ahead of us, with the same enthusiasm, the same zest for sharing his discoveries and for publicising the discoveries of the professional astronomers in beautiful prose for the educated public. So many things have happened recently in astronomy in the last year that I think even the general public have been unable to avoid the subject. We had the closest approach, as you know, of Mars to the Earth 50,000 odd years ago was the last time it came so close. People here in the Galway streets, I passed one group who wondered if a giant mast had been erected and it was some warning light for aircraft, or was it some spaceship, or what was this bright red light in the sky? It aroused a lot of interest. And then we had a wonderful display of the aurora. The Galileo mission to Jupiter, its swan song, after a wonderful series of imaging, as we know, of the moons of Jupiter and the cloud belts of Jupiter, ended with its swan song as it descended into the clouds of Jupiter, radioing all the way and giving information deep into the atmosphere of that planet. And right now we have an ion-propelled spacecraft, European project, going to the moon. We await results of that when it arrives. And of course the headlines today being grabbed by the various missions to Mars. The Express being the latest one with magnificent pictures revealing the presence of water. Now I mention all these topics because they engaged John Birmingham, who's the subject of my talk today. And more than a century ago, he was talking about these in the context of the mid-19th century to the public, trying to get them interested. And as we'll see in a minute, he was talking from a very remote part of what was then the United Kingdom. And from his tiny estate, a very modest landlord in terms of his wealth, in fact he was deeply in debt and in financial trouble all through his life. And there were many legal attempts to confiscate his property. So he's always having to battle. He wasn't comfortably ensconced like some other amateur astronomers in Ireland. But he discovered a Brighton star, what was called a new star in those days, in 1866. And he went on after that to produce a catalogue of red variable stars, which gained him, the year before he died, in the Cunningham Gold Medal of the Royal Irish Academy. And then he fell into complete obscurity because he died a bachelor, the last of the line. His great library, local tradition says, just rotted when the house was unroofed, and the books and the maps, the great 2-metre map that Julian Schmidt had given him from the 1870s, the last map produced before photographic atlases were formed. All these things were lost, and his memory was lost. Well, if we look at the 19th century astronomical scene, I like to think that the universe was busted wide open by Friedrich Bessel. Can you do that, Marcus? While we do, here's the man himself. geometric vessel. And he was the first to obtain a measure of parallax. Can you read that at the back, or is it too small?
No, it's fine.
Just about. Sorry to test your eyes. Okay. Is there a stick? Ah, yes. This will do. It's like it doesn't have the hammer on the end, but anyway. So he measured the parallax of a star and thus its distance for the first time. 61 Sydney. Now, this was something that Aristarchus had been looking for when he proposed the heliocentric hypothesis. Because, as you know, if the Earth is going around the Sun, then that's the diameter of the Earth's orbit should give parallax. And Aristarchus, of course, couldn't detect it, and so he was bold enough to conclude to the incredulous ideas of his Greek colleagues in the 3rd century BC, that therefore the stars were at enormous distances away. And his hypothesis, of course, as we know, was not accepted at that time. Well, I won't go through all these. William Parsons completed his giant reflecting telescope at Birr in 1845, revealed the spiral structures of galaxies. Johann Galler and Heinrich Darre at the Berlin Observatory located Neptune in 1846. Friedrich Argelander produced his remarkable compilation of 324,000 odd stars down to the 9th magnitude. Angelo Secchi at the Rome Observatory and William Huggins in London made the first measurements of the spectra of stars and revealed that they were made of the same elements as the Earth. So Aristotle's idea of quintessence was finally proved wrong. Julius Schmidt, who gave his a copy of his magnificent map of the moon in 1875, 2-meter diameter, to John Birmingham. Over 32,000 craters and over 300 rivers. So those are just a few of the major discoveries that were being made at the time when this young man in Tuam began to be active. One only has to dip into an astronomy book from the middle of the last century. My favourite is a book I've inherited from my mother's grandfather, James Breen's Planetary Worlds, published in 1854, to appreciate the abyss that separates us from those days. For example, astronomers are baffled by the source of energy of the sun. This radiant energy, where is it coming from? Was it combustion? Was it electrical? What was the source of this energy? Were sunspots holes of a core, revealing a core interior through a hot luminous cloud at the outer part of the sun? Or conversely, were they slag, as some German astronomers considered, on a molten surface? So the sun was baffling. Most astronomers in the mid-19th century considered the craters on the moon a volcanic in origin. And of the planetary surfaces, the only definite features were the polar caps on Mars and the cloud belts of Jupiter, which is not the surface, but those were the main features which could be definitely identified at that time. But the really big difference, in my opinion, was that they didn't have electricity. So the amateur or professional astronomer used clockwork to keep the telescope in sync with the motion of the heavens. And they would strike a match to light a lamp to write their observations down. Little things that we take for granted now were for them a little bit more trouble. But they certainly had the same zest for discovery. If you read about the size of some of the meetings, the British Association for the Advancement of Science would have groups in numbers of thousands, not hundreds. Such was the enthusiasm to know more about the nature of the heavens. Well, if we look at some of the Irish interest in astronomy, we're talking about the 19th century as a whole. I'm sorry that may be a little bit grey rather than black. I printed it out bold, but it doesn't seem to be bold on the screen. Besides the two major observatories in Ireland, Dunsink and Armagh, there were a number of amateur ones as well. But just to go through some of the principal names, and I'm sure you're well familiar with these already, the directors in Dunsink through the 19th century, John Brinkley, William Hamilton, the mathematical genius, Franz Friedrich Brunner, who, born in Berlin, came through the USA, the Ann Arbor Observatory in Michigan, to be director at Dunsink, and Robert Paul Mohr, who's very well known for his writings as semi-popular writings as well as his astronomy, and moved from Dunsink later in life to be Professor of Astronomy at Cambridge. And at Armagh, Thomas Robinson early on, the long reign, from 1834 to 1882, and then John Dreyer, who came from Copenhagen, which is an observatory that engaged John Birmingham's interest, as we'll see. At there, I don't need to remind you, we have the Earls of Ross, William Parsons and Lawrence Parsons, who did remarkable work with the Leviathan telescope, that maybe a little bit unreal with it, in terms of being unable to have a horizontal motion. And coming to some amateurs, at Markree, Edward Cooper established the largest refractor in the world in 1834 and produced the Markree catalogue, which listed 60,000 odd stars down to the 12th magnitude. And of interest particularly for our purposes now, Walter Dubourg, who also came from Copenhagen to be director at Markree from 1874 to 1883, worked on binary stars. And I missed showing it, I'll show a photograph later on. Recently preserved from developers, inverted commas, the house at Daramona, the house of William Wilson, who erected a Grubb reflector there in 1871 and a larger one in 1881, and determined the temperature of the sun's surface very accurately for those days, just over 6,000 degrees. And then we have in our own county Galway, John Birmingham, 1816 to 1884, who purchased a Cooke refractor in 1869. Now I just quote, and you won't be able to read this because it's in very small print and it's going to disappear over the edge of it. No, it won't. I read what Ball said in his reminiscences published by his son. Tuam in the west of Ireland is a place remote from the ordinary scientific centres, but in that town there dwelt a very acute observer of the skies, the late Mr. Birmingham. I do not think he ever used a telescope of high power. No doubt he had a fairly good instrument. It's a pity it's not here. It's up in St Giles College in Tuam. We could judge that for ourselves. But he had something else, without which the most admirable instruments are of little use. He had genuine interest in his subject, well, we take that for granted. He also possessed that accuracy and care which is so necessary in faithfully recording observations. Now that there's no doubt whatsoever, his accuracy was in part owed to exceptional eyesight, has to be, because of what he saw with his small telescope. And the care he made in recording observations, he was obviously meticulous. Now, if we just see what John, if I can be so familiar, was working with, and we compare it with other telescopes being used by some Irish astronomers and some English amateurs liaising with them. The world's largest telescope and reflector, of course, William Parsons in the early 1800s. Thomas Espin, who, as we'll see, worked with John Birmingham or after him, 17-inch reflector. At Armagh there was a 15-inch reflector, Thomas Robinson's. Edward Cooper had the world's largest refractor when it was put up. William Wilson, a 12-inch refractor. I'm going down in size.